we discussed there what is meant by macroeconomic variables, right? So macroeconomic variable is any variable that resembles the whole economy, right? If you take demand, aggregate demand, it resembles the demand of the whole country. If you take the employment, it represents the employment of the whole country. If you take inflation, it is the rate at which the price levels increases from the previous year to the next, right? It resembles the whole country. So the variables that resembles the whole country are known as macroeconomic variables, right? So sort of I am giving you the overview of the macroeconomics, which is our first lesson in this unit, right? I'm doing this because I missed that part because I was not ready with the presentation. And also I'm doing it back again because there was few not attending that class, right? So macroeconomic variables are the variables that resembles the whole country. Now, if I take some examples, right? These are just few examples. Uh, these are few examples. There are more macroeconomic aggregates than this, right? Employment, general price levels, that stands for GPL. That's the price levels of the country. Then the GDP, what we are going to discuss today, gross domestic product. Then the exchange rate, what you are very familiar these days because of its fluctuations, right? $1 going from 184 to 200 rupees and coming back down again to 195. Then BOP balance, right? That is the difference between the inflows and the outflows of currency in and out of a country per year, right? So these are variables that resembles the whole country. That's why they are known as macroeconomic variables. Are we clear? Right? So every country tries to bring these variables, right? Every country try to brings these variables to favorable levels, right? You understand that? So when these variables reach favorable levels, they are known as macroeconomic objectives. So we already discussed all the macroeconomic objectives, like I am mentioning few here, right? Now, for instance, if you take the employment is the that the people who are willing and able to do a job can find a job. So if people who are willing and able to do a job can find a job in the country, then you call it the full employment. Every person finds a job, but I told you that there's a natural rate of unemployment which is around 3%. So if the whole country is employed around 9 to 97%, we can say that the country is fully employed. Do you understand it? So employment is the macroeconomic variable that resembles the whole country. Taking that employment level to full is an objective, which is which the government has to achieve, right? Then we take the second one, GPL. GPL is the price level. Price level resembles the prices of the whole country, right? If you take that price levels into a steady level where there are lower movements, it's called price stability. So that's the objective, to keep the price levels at a low, right, fluctuation levels. You understand? To keep them steady. Then GDP is the right output of the country, right? If you bring that GDP, um, if you uh, increase that GDP from one year to the next, it is known as economic growth. That's the objective. Then the exchange rate is the rate at which the rupees exchange for dollars, right? If you keep it at a steady level, that is the target, that is the objective, right? But if it keeps on fluctuating, going up or even going down, getting appreciated or getting depreciated, that's not good for the country. That's not the target. To keep it fixed level, to keep it at a fixed level is the target. That is the macroeconomic objective. Then BOP balance, that is the currency coming in and out, right? So the expected outcome is to have a balance, right? Not to have more inflows or more outflows, but to have a balance between the inflows and the outflows. We understand that. So macroeconomic variables resembles the whole country, and when you bring those macroeconomic variables to a favorable level, you call it macroeconomic objectives. But if these variables go to undesirable levels, if these variables go to undesirable levels, we call them macroeconomic problems. You understand that? Now, if we expand the same examples we got, first employment. So if the employment comes down to unfavorable level, is called unemployment. General price levels. General price levels is the prices, right? If the prices are fluctuating very fast, or if you're having high inflation, that is a macroeconomic problem. GDP is the output. If the output of the country is coming down, it is economic recession. That is a problem, right? That we are facing nowadays, right? Exchange rate, that's the variable. If it fluctuates very quickly, it's a problem. You understand that, as we are facing today, right? So when the exchange rate keeps on fluctuating, it becomes a problem, right? BOP is the difference between the inflows and the outflows. If they fluctuate, right? If the inflows are higher than outflow, or even outflows are higher than inflows, then there's imbalance. Imbalance is a problem. You understand it? What we need is a balance. Okay. So macroeconomic variables, if I may put it to a nutshell again, resembles the whole country. If you take these variables to a favorable level, you call it macroeconomic objectives, right? Okay. And if you take this variable, if these variables run into unfavorable levels, nobody wants to take them there. But if they run into unfavorable level, it's called macroeconomic problems. Are we clear? So what the government would do is they would keep on influencing this, right? Macroeconomic variables. So what they can do is in order to influence these macroeconomic variables, right? They have to use some other macroeconomic variables. You understand that? So using macroeconomic variables in order to influence a macroeconomic variable is known as macroeconomic management, right? Now, if I give you a simple example, employment, right? So the employment might come down, or the unemployment might increase when there are lower amount of investments, right? So what the government can do is increase the money supply, that is monetary policy, right? When they increase the money supply, people will have more money and the demand will increase. And when the people want to purchase more goods and services, definitely there will be output to follow. The output will increase, right? Which means there will be more businesses. When there are more businesses, there will be more job opportunities and the employment rate will go up. So in order for the government to influence the employment level, they can use the monetary policy, they can use the money supply, right? So doing that is known as macroeconomic management. Clear? We discussed this the other day also, right? So when there are mainly two macroeconomic policies that the government can use, right? One is, of course, the supply side policies, right? Now, what do you mean by supply side policies? Supply side policies are where the government let the supply, right, increase. Do you understand that? Now, it is like demand and supply. If you take aggregate, right? If you take aggregate demand, it is downward sloping. Aggregate demand is the total amount of goods and services that the country wants to buy, right? So at higher price levels, you find the demand is low. At low price levels, you find the demand is high. So it has a negative relationship, right, to the price levels. As a result, you find the aggregate demand that is downward sloping, right? But right, contrary to that, you find the aggregate supply is upward sloping. At low price levels, there is low supply. That's the total supply coming in the country, the output. At high price levels, you find the supply is high, right? So they have a positive relationship. So accordingly, you find the price level and the output of the country will be determined. Now, one way that the country can increase the output is to increase the aggregate supply. If the government tries to increase the aggregate supply in order to increase the output, it is known as supply side policies, right? Now, the best example is government cutting off unwanted regulations, right? Sometimes you find because of regulations, output is low. So government, right, reduce the regulations, deregulate the economy so that the right businesses can boost quickly. You understand that, right? Now the one example is here in Sri Lanka, there's a huge alcohol tax, but in Vietnam it is not so. So a foreigner who comes here, right, will have to buy a beer at the price of 5 beers in Vietnam, right? So that will reduce, that will not give incentives for the tourism. You understand that? So if the government wants to increase the supply of tourism, they have to reduce, right? At least for the hotels, they have to reduce the alcohol tax. You understand that, right? So when that happens, aggregate supply will increase and the aggregate supply curve will shift rightwards, right? So when the aggregate supply curve shifts rightwards, you'll find the output level increasing, price levels are coming down, so which is very good for the country, right? So supply side policies are very good, but they are very limited, right? Every country would try to increase the supply, right? Now, the best example here at this situation, the government is trying to increase the cultivations, right? They are using some implementation in, right, bringing people to cultivate their own land, right? Now, that is a supply side policy where the government is trying to increase the supply. Do you understand that? That way you can increase the supply at the same time you can bring down the prices. That's very good. But that is very limited. So more often than not, what we find is, right, not the supply side policies, we find mostly demand side policies, right? So there are mainly two types of demand side policies, right? As you already know, one is monetary policy, the other is fiscal policy. Exactly, right? So now in the demand side policies, right, what we do is, okay, the government is trying to increase the demand, right? So as you already know, the demand is downward sloping, supply is upward sloping, right? And government can increase the output by increasing the supply, right? But here we are discussing government increasing the output by increasing the demand, right? So when the demand increases, it will shift rightwards and you will find there is a new equilibrium, right? Output will increase, which is good, right? But there's a risk in every demand side policy, right? As you see here, right? When the aggregate demand increases, at the same time you find the right price levels are also increasing, right? So that's what we are learning in the future. If you are a grade 13, you have already learned this, right? That is called demand pull inflation, the price levels going up due to increasing demand. You understand it? So demand increase is good, but it also keeps on increasing the price levels. That's why the government has to be very careful. You understand that? So mostly it is demand side policies that government are using. They are using either, right, uh, monetary policy or fiscal policy. In both monetary policy and fiscal policy, you will be learning monetary policy in your money and banking, that is seventh unit, and fiscal policy in the eighth unit, that is public finance, right? If you are grade 13, that you have already learned this, right? Both can be expansionary, both can be contractionary. Both monetary policy and fiscal policy can bring the demand in higher, and both the fiscal policy and the monetary policy can bring the demand down. So when you increase the demand, the output will increase. Because of that, you call it expansionary policy. So here what will happen is aggregate demand will increase and it will shift rightwards, right? And as a result, you'll find the output level increasing, right? To from 1600 to 1700. But as I said, at the same time you find the price was also increasing. So expansionary monetary policy is also inflationary. That is understood. This is called demand pull inflation, right? Do you understand it? So that way also you can increase the output. You understand it? But in a situation where there are high price levels, expansionary monetary policy is not accepted at all. Right? If the price levels are high or inflation is too high, the government should find a way to control the prices. At that time, government should go for a contractionary, right, monetary policy. Is that clear? So the contraction in the contraction in monetary policy, what happens is government reduces the money supply. When the money supply increases, people demand will come down. So the aggregate demand will shift leftwards, and as a result, you find the output level coming down, right, from 1,800 to 1,700, right? And also the price levels are the target here. Price levels will be controlled. Did you understand that? Right. So um, that is macroeconomic in a nutshell. You understand that, right? So this is the picture that should come, right, in your page number 3 box, right, which you need to draw, right? So while you're drawing, you can ask any questions you have. Is there any question from what I discussed so far?
So, so,
Yes, Putek.
so, like, what sort of things can you do to increase demand? Like, what can the government do, sir?
You're asking me what the government can do to increase the demand, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, government, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Government can increase the demand, right, in two ways. One is known as one is known as the monetary policy. Other one is fiscal policy. In the monetary policy, what they do is they increase the money supply. They give more money to the hands of the people. One way is to reduce the interest rates. When the interest rates are low, people will get more loans. When they get more loans, there will be more money in their hands, and they will try to buy more goods and services. When they try to buy more goods and services, the aggregate demand level will increase at the same prices, and you will find the countries expanding. Got it clear? The same thing can be done using the fiscal policy. In the fiscal policy, government will be using their government revenue and expenditure as tools. For instance, if you take the government expenditure, government giving more salaries to the people, right? When the government give more salaries to the people, they will spend more. Their demand will increase. Then as the demand increases, the output level also will increase. Did you understand that?